Adam, your impressions of what we've seen over the last few hours. It has been an extraordinary outpouring of emotion, really, as Britain pays its final farewell to Elizabeth II.
Yes, well, I think today has really been a sort of culmination and the climax, really, of a period of 10 days of mourning. Of course, we first had the ceremony at Westminster Abbey, where Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were originally married in 1947. And of course, a few years later, where the Queen was coronated herself in 1953. So I think it was a very poignant place and a very symbolic place for her to be. I think also the fact that the Queen was the first person to have a funeral there since 1760, since reign of King George, was really a further indication of how important the Queen was in terms of the grand history of the UK. But the ceremony itself was, of course, deeply rooted in sort of Christian ritual. Of course, the Queen is the head of Anglican Church, as you would expect. And of course, that was followed by this extraordinary spectacle of the procession that accompanied the Queen's coffin across London. You really won't get a better sort of sense of the British enthusiasm for the theatrical than what we just saw. And of course was deeply symbolic. It had several members of detachments from Commonwealth organisations, which of course represented the fact that the Queen wasn't just the head of state of the UK, but of course many Commonwealth areas as well. And there was a particularly touching moment, I thought, where you saw Buckingham Palace staff line up outside the palace as the Queen's coffin passed. But I think really today, in the past 10 days really, has really seen a sort of sense of competing themes. I would say the first would be a sense of mourning versus celebration. Of course, it's a very sad time with the passing of the longest reigning monarch, but you also have this look to the future with the beginning of King Charles III's reign. Then you also have this tension between the sort of civilian aspects of it with the military aspects of it. Of course, the Queen was the head of the British Armed Forces, which is why we saw such a strong presence of the military in that procession. But then finally, I thought you had this competing notions of private grief with public grief. And obviously, the Queen herself was a very important member of her family as a mother and a grandmother. But you also had a sense that the Queen was such an important person for the rest of the country. And really what we've seen over the last week or so has been this attempt to try to balance the two. I think the perfect sort of indication of the way they did that was with the Queen lying in state, where you had hundreds of thousands of people queuing up for several hours to see the Queen lying in state. But at the same time, you had members of her family, her children and her grandchildren, who were actually holding a vigil as members of the public walked past. So it's really trying to trying to balance those different competing elements, which I think all very much sort of represent the Queen's reign overall. It's trying to balance these intricate aspects of public and private life in line with their constitutional duties.
And Adam, all of this, of course, is redolent of the extraordinary length of her reign. I mean, the vast majority of the people in those crowds there have never known another monarch, and now suddenly they have to start getting used to a new one. This is going to be a potentially complicated transition.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the fact that, as you mentioned, the Queen has been reigning for such a long time means that actually the scenes that we're seeing now are very unfamiliar to most people in the country because we have never witnessed anything like it. And certainly, the fact that it's taking place in the modern era shows that actually these scenes are much more publicly broadcast than they otherwise would be. I think it's a little bit different what we're seeing now with the ascension of King Charles to the throne to Elizabeth, in the sense that Charles is the longest heir in British history. He's 73 years old. And so the British public already have a sort of a sense of who Charles is as a person. But I think it's yet to be seen what kind of King Charles will be. So I think, obviously the Queen was a very sort of reassuring figure through such an extraordinary period of transformation in British life, from the rebuilding of the Second World War to joining and leaving the European Union, and finally with COVID at the end. So I think, Charles is really going to have to indicate strongly, the fact that he takes his position in quite a similar way to the way that the Queen took it. I think that the speech that he made after he became king, the following day after the Queen passed away, really indicated his acknowledgement of what it meant to be king compared to what it meant to just be a prince. So I think that the king is certainly going to be quite a different figure. He's going to have quite a different approach to really how he took his previous role as the heir.
Adam Schwarz live for us today in London. Thanks very much indeed for that analysis. Adam Schwarz, writer and commentator, joining us from the British capital on this very historic day.